I'm here to talk about Adventist identity crisis issues, and my presentation is one question: is the SDA Church facing a midlife crisis? That's a question I want to address. I want to see if we can attempt to explore that question. So welcome and enjoy the journey with me. Is that okay? Yeah. And in the process, be smiling, look happy. Are we together? Yeah. This issue of looking like you are sad, you are in deep thoughts, cut it out. Are we together? So let's look around and smile at each other.
All right.
Let's say a prayer. Father in heaven, we pray that as we think about these things, they will get clearer to us, so that our responsibility as an institution of higher learning will be fulfilled as we chart the way forward for your people. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
I will move a little faster because I've been told to try to cut the time. But I'm going to give a background of this question, then I will give a premise, then I will talk about identity crisis, then we'll look at SDA growth stages, then we'll look at midlife crisis itself, then the solution to midlife crisis, and then we do a conclusion. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there is one Greek who existed before Socrates. You know Socrates. So before Socrates, there was a character called Heraclitus. And this guy said that the only constant in life is change. Now that's a very obvious thing, but since he was the first one to say it and have it written, now we have to remember that somebody said that change is constant. Whatever happens, change is taking place. You don't have to like it. You don't have to get angry or happy. Change is doing what? It's taking place. You are growing old as you sit there. Are we together? Stay there long enough, you are growing older than you are when you came in. Yeah. And the same guy said, no man steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river. When you step in, the river is flowing. So you are no longer in the same river. So we may wish to remain the same. And that's the nature of religion. I remember one day in the past when I was a student of Professor Nyamundi seated there, he taught us about religion and says one thing about religion is that it's highly traditional and conservative. In fact, many of you like people who are conservative, people who don't change anything. They look to be holier because the nature of religion is conservative. Are we together? Not necessarily that conservative is right, but that's the nature of religion. Is that okay, friends?
Yes.
Yeah. Come on now. So, are there things that don't change as everything else changes? That's a question. So, I will read a few Bible verses there. Malachi chapter 3 verse 6, for example, it says, "For I, the Lord, do not change." That's a nice one, isn't it? I, the Lord, do not what? Change. But now when you see Romans chapter 12 verse 2, it says, "Do not be conformed to this world." Don't change. But be transformed. Change. I don't know, does it make sense? Do not be conformed, don't change, isn't it? And then be transformed, change. So there is good change and bad change. Do not change like the world. So God doesn't change, and we can change the right way or the wrong way. So the question is, how are we changing? Now, how are we adapting to our changing circumstances and environment? Are we losing ourselves in the process of adjusting to change? That's the concern. Because change is a constant. Are we losing ourselves the church, not ourselves a country or a community or a tribe, but ourselves a church? An example I will give is, are we losing anything when the Bible study guide, hymn book, E.G. White writings are shifting from hard copies to soft copies? I'm just asking, are we losing anything? I know it's possible one or two of you have condemned people in your congregation for coming with a phone and not coming with a hard copy. It's possible. It's possible. So is the struggle for social media presence causing us to play to the gallery so that the audience is no longer God but winning numbers online, shares online, likes online, followers? I'm just asking, how do we respond to change? Are we losing the mission and the identity that defines our purpose? Are we still relevant to God's mission for the church, or have we changed to the extent of being off the course? I'm still on the background. Have we lost it? That's the question. Is there a tension between being relevant to our constantly changing times and remaining faithful to God's mission? Is there a tension? And I think that tension is what brings us here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are concerns of identity alarmist, pessimistic, or genuine? When people say, we are losing it, the church is no longer the same. Is it genuine, or these are just pessimists and alarmists who want to look more important than others? Are we dealing with a church getting lost in rapidly changing times, or is it a misunderstood phenomenon of midlife crisis? That's the question. Now, let's look at the premise where we are building it. Now, this gentleman, Russell Barry, and he taught me here many years ago, he says the church is a living organism.
Oh, yes.
It is not a dead organization. All living organisms go through a life cycle. This is the premise. This is where this discussion is built. If you break this, it's gone. Are we together? You know, when you break the premise, you are done. It's over. That a church is a living organization. So it has life cycles, including birth. A church is born, a church grows, a church matures, a church starts aging, then a church can do what? Can die. Churches do die. You just need to loiter and collect information about churches in some Western countries where there are now empty cathedrals, because churches can do what? Can die. We don't like to think that a church must someday die, says Barry. So we try to move it away from death by institutionalizing the past. Because in the past, your grandfather had a hard copy Bible, you make it an institution, you must have a hard copy Bible. You are institutionalizing what?
The past.
The past.
Yeah.
And you even talk about versions. You say it has to be King James Version. Institutionalizing the past. Because you are afraid of dying, now you make what was in the past come an institution. Very, very interesting.
Okay.
Some of you have neckties in the vestry preparation room to institutionalize the past.
Yeah.
Because if you look like this, it's not holy enough.
Yeah.
So the ultimate result is that the church ceases to be relevant to the present society. So the church and the present are no longer the same thing. Then you know what happens? It leads to death anyway. Because the young people look at the church. You are the only one who can identify with it because it's in your past. The young people don't understand what's going on. And what you are hanging on is neither religious, is not the gospel, is not spiritual, is just a past that you cherish. And so the young people leave the church, and the death of the church that you are avoiding takes place.
Come on now. Come on.
Let's continue, please. We are still on the premise. Are we together? Remember, don't forget the premise is that the church is a living organism that has got life cycles. Life cycles. That's why it's good. So no living organism lives forever in this world. So how does the church continue? In nature, life is perpetuated by reproduction. So it is with the church. The church continues to grow and expand by reproduction, creating new congregations with a new life cycle. So where we are not baptizing people, death is coming. One researcher has pointed out that the older a church gets, the less effective it becomes in reaching lost people. This study found, for example, that churches under 10 years age usually require 10 people to baptize one new convert. Whereas churches that are 50 years or older require 100 people to baptize one person. It's getting more difficult because you are getting older. You need more energy to climb the stairs because of your age. If this is what happens when the church ages, what is the future of the churches at different stages of growth in Africa? Do you know what? For a long time we have said the church is growing in Africa, but you Americans, you Europeans, we are heading there.
Yeah.
Because we are aging. We are aging. And probably in your very, very old age, you will see what you condemned Americans to be.
One day.
So are we facing a growth stage issue? Now, the growth cycle has 4 stages according to Robert Hale in his book, Cultivating Perennial Churches. He says that the first stage, the first cycle of growth is upswing, where the church is birthed with a dream. When the church is born and you give it a new name, Central. Are we together? Or New Life. Zion SDA Church, Jerusalem SDA Church. It is birthed with a dream. That's the first cycle of its life. Then the second is still upswing. It defines its mission and beliefs. We believe every time they come to the pulpit, it's fundamental beliefs. That's all they're preaching. That's all they're talking about. And then third, they start development goals. We need a plot, a piece of land. Are we together? Yeah, we need to put up something. Now they are moving. Are we together? They are developing. Now it's no longer a lot about beliefs. Now we need to develop. We need new seats. We have seen some seats in China. We need new seats. We need a new microphone. Oh, there are glass pulpits that are very nice. And then the fourth one, development of structures to support those goals. We need a committee to fund the money. Are we together? We need a committee to make sure we have an excellent camp meeting. We are comfortable. The food is good. The gifts, the guests are well treated. Nothing spiritual. Are we together? Just making sure that everything is okay. Are we struggling with a cycle issue in this identity conference? Is it a cycle issue? Could it be a midlife crisis? That's what I'm asking. Ultimately, however, a church moves to the downside of the life cycle. Dale suggests 4 stages, and he says the first one is nostalgia. You start remembering. Things aren't happening as they used to. So people start recalling the good old days. Then they move to the second stage. And it's possible, if we sit here and say, ask questions, there will be somebody about good old days here, ready with a question about the good old days. Then they move to the second stage in which they start questioning some of the things they are currently doing. Why is the church now doing this? Very angry people. Are we together? Yeah. Why is the church? Then third, they move into polarization. Polarization now is you go into groups. I don't agree with what those brethren say. Yeah. So you have a group of people who think like you, and there are those who think that way. Some remember one way it used to be, others a different way. Ultimately, the church may divide into warring camps, disagreeing on what has gone wrong with the church. Finally, the church ends up in disintegration. Yeah. And people start leaving, and the church may finally decline and do what? Die. Because the premise is that anything that lives, eventually it must do what? It must die. So at what point of the cycle of life is the church in Africa? Or the SDA church as a whole? Are we at the growth cycle of midlife crisis? At what development stage is the worldwide SDA church? At what development stage is the church in Africa? Could it be that those who are younger are feeling better off, yet they are moving to a place in future where they will be like the older churches they are now castigating? The church has growth development stages like any growing organism. Identity crisis comes at several points of growth, and particularly during transition. When there is a transition, there is always a crisis. Could it be the church may be facing a midlife crisis? Let's talk about identity crisis. Identity helps us live a well, complete, fulfilling life. You can see that there. And you know that psychologist Erickson is saying an identity crisis is defined as a period of uncertainty or confusion in a person's life. The crisis occurs when a person's sense of identity becomes insecure and unstable. An identity crisis usually occurs when there is change in a person's life. So when changes are taking place, there will always be identity crisis as you shift from one to another. Do you know without identity we can't function as we ought to? That's why this conference is important. Now, changes in a person's life takes place majorly at teenage and towards old age. Those are the major changes in your life. Identity crisis is associated with the times of transition, childhood to adulthood, adolescent, adulthood to old age, maturity or eldership, midlife crisis. I want you to note that identity crisis can occur at any time, even when you change a country. If you are sent to go and live in China as a missionary, you may go through an identity crisis. Or if you change jobs, you are just okay using a motorcycle as a good pastor. Now you are an official in the conference. And nobody has a motorcycle and you can't afford one. You go through a crisis and you get a loan you can't afford because you want your identity to reach where you are okay. Changing relationships. We will focus on transition related to the life cycle, not these other things. So that's the focus. Teenage crossing from childhood to adulthood, old age crossing to maturity or eldership. That's the midlife crisis. Now, psychologically speaking, Manziel says this, psychologically speaking, a human passes different stages in one's life. The childhood is the first, and the last one is the what? The elder stage. That's where the midlife crisis comes in. From there, they get into the elder stage. And here there are 5 more stages, but maybe let's not read what these characters say. Let's keep moving. Now, the next one there, I have given George Knight, our Adventist historian, has broken down the history of this church, you know, and my sister did a good assignment here. And it begins with Millerites. That's where Adventism finds its roots. Then after that, he says there is an era of doctrinal development in 1844 to 1848. It's too tiny. Yeah. Then after that, there is era of organizational development. Now, all that is listed there. Oh yeah. All that is listed here is by George Knight. But what you find in the parenthesis is just my suggestion. That Millerites stage was the infancy stage in our life cycle as a church. Then when we were developing doctrines, sanctuary, are we together? Then we discovered the Sabbath, though that's still infancy. And then organizational stage, getting organized, moving towards 1863, some resisting, some accepting, we were learning how to crawl. Infancy. Then institutional and lifestyle, when schools were developed under Bell, and Sister White had a vision about health, you know, that's still infancy. But now we come to childhood, era of revival, reformation, 1888, you remember, righteousness by faith, Wagner, then era of reorganization and crisis, you remember, Kellogg, John Kellogg, 1900, 1910, era of worldwide growth, then challenges and possibilities, maturity. This is by George Knight, but the parentheses are mine. And I suggest that from 1955, we started moving from childhood now to teenage, a crisis of teenage. And we had our own crisis of teenage, because when we go to teenage, there are questions we started asking, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes from now. The spectrum of time can now allow us to redefine these periods defined by George Knight to be growth cycles of the SDA church. No spectrum where you show beginning and end and you show the different developments. Now, using this part of the spectrum and characteristic exhibited, we can safely suggest that it is possible we are moving from teenage into midlife cycle of growth, which comes with midlife crisis. Let's go to the next one. Now, we are looking at SDA growth stages. The age of the church may not be exactly in the same years as the age of a person. So you can't say that this church began last year, so it's still an infant. No. The age of the church may have to do with the age of worshippers. That's one. By the way, if many worshippers are very young, it is possible to say it's a young church. So we can give the age of the church from the age of the worshippers. But the age of the church also has to do with how long it has existed in a community and its growing or declining impact. The latter will be our preferred perspective, particularly just for this presentation. Otherwise, we can use the others elsewhere. A cycle of life, while related to a certain age or number of years, may not be exact. Listen to this so that you don't ask the wrong question. Listen to this. Therefore, a cycle of life may be best told by characteristics exhibited more than by the years the person or organization has. Because there can be a child who acts maturely at 10 years, while there is an adult at 20 who is still acting childish. So the years may not be the precise way of telling the age, but the characteristics. Is that okay? Yeah. Because you know clearly, you have heard people saying you are not acting your age. Because your age and your acting are not matching. So we cannot use years per se and say, okay, if you said infancy is the first 10 years of the church, then childhood should be the next 10 years. It doesn't work that way. Even in real life of your own age. A child brought up, let's say, in poverty or difficult parenting, where very early in life, by age 8, they have learned to cook, they can fetch firewood, they can go to the river, is not the same as a child brought up in abundance where there is a house help, because that child may learn cooking at 23, while the other one has learned cooking at 8.
You see?
So midlife crisis, again, when you read about these life cycles, you are given a distance. You are told that it is between this and that, between 40 and 60. That's the core. But others say actually between 30 and 70, depending on an individual. For some, it can be earlier, others, it can be later. Therefore, the attempt to divide time and tell exact age may be misleading. If you try this study and you say, let me now divide the time from William Miller 1833 to organization of SDA 1863, how many years are those? Then pick the same years and add further ahead, you will make a mistake. That's why you study the characteristics of what is happening at that time. Look at this. Questions of teenage identity crisis. When there is a teenager, the teenager always asks themselves, am I a child or an adult? Because a teenager is standing between childhood and adulthood. Am I really an adult? Sorry, that's a spelling mistake. Am I really an adult, not an adult? Then also comes the attempt to assert that one is an adult. For example, when you have a teenage child, when you call them, they don't come immediately. They come after a few minutes because they are trying to assert that they are adults who don't just jump around when you call them. They come 5 minutes later and say, did you call me? They are asserting their authority. And so when an organization reaches teenage, it may start asking, are we evangelicals?
Yeah. Okay.
There's such a question somewhere. Are we together?
Yeah.
There's such a question somewhere. If you have lived long enough in class, you may have come across such a question. And this assignment was done by Donald Barnhouse and Walter Martins, who were evangelicals and wanted to identify whether SDS can be included in the community of evangelicals. And interestingly, when you look at the years when this business was taking place, it will be of interest to you. Are we evangelicals? And while evangelicals were interested, we Adventists were also very eager to know whether we are evangelicals. And this is what you call in other languages peer pressure. Are we together?
Yeah.
Peer pressure. Because we have our peers and pressure. Are we evangelicals? And then you find questions such as, are we a remnant or the remnant? You know, those kind of questions. These are questions of teenage challenges, identity of a teenager. So then who am I? Am I the or I? And then you find Leroy Froome comes up with questions on the doctrine. Are we together? Questions on our doctrine. Why are you questioning your own doctrine? Are we together? And teenagers are very interesting. They will ask you, does God exist? Is SDA the only true church? And they were born in your house. You, a pastor. Are we together? Because these are questions of teenagers, questions on doctrines. Are we together, friends?
Sure.
Let's continue. Let's talk about questions of midlife crisis. Questions of midlife crisis, identity issues. You know, when you reach midlife now, friends, and many of you could be in midlife, so this is where you may be. Midlife is when you look in the mirror and you start noticing you have white hair. Are we together?
Yeah.
Then it dawns on you that your children are no longer children, they are adults. Are you aware, friends? And all of a sudden you discover that I'm actually growing what? Old. And then one day you see young people running and you try running and you discover you can't run as fast as you used to run. And all of a sudden it dawns on you that time is running out. Then now you ask yourself, have I achieved what I was supposed to do? What? Achieve. Am I a failure or not? That's why sometimes when people are very old, they talk too much because they are justifying a lot. Are we together? Their time is short and they have a lot to justify. Am I a failure or have I succeeded? That's a question that a person in midlife crisis is asking. Compared to others my age, am I equally successful? Then you can blame government, blame the church. I've spent a lot of time in this church. Some of these leaders are just thieves. That's why you see the way we are living and what have you. Why? Midlife, you are now trying to explain why you have not made progress like others. What is my purpose in life? And all of a sudden you have a new zeal. Have I left a mark? Am I running out of time? And questions start arising. Has SDA Church lost the way? Midlife crisis. You are now wondering, have we lost the way? Are we focused on mission? Have we lost our purpose and identity? And even the last one gets more interesting. Can we have an Adventist identity conference at AUA? Midlife what? Midlife crisis. Now, there are some experts, friends, like Margaret Hike, who have stated categorically that midlife crisis is a myth. And instead, she says that we are just responding to the pressures of life at midlife. For me, it sounds like the same thing. I don't know. You know, Margaret says that there is no midlife crisis. Only that at midlife you are responding to what happens in the middle of your life. But that is the crisis. Are we together? But you see, we live in a free world where everyone is entitled to their opinion, isn't it? So if she says that it's not there, we agree with her. Okay, according to you, it's not there. We are just responding. So are there pressures the church is facing at this stage of its existence? Is the church responding to something? Does the population growth increase the number of nominal and committed Christians? Using probability in mathematics. If in 10 church members, 2 will be nominal, what happens when we have 1,000 members? Does it increase nominal members? People who are members in the church, but they are not committed to it. And so, as nominal members increase, the preachers, the pastors, the leaders get concerned. Does population growth mean we will have more pastors joining church ranks without scrutiny to their commitment?
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, because long ago when we were a smaller church, anyone who wanted to be a pastor was scrutinized by everybody. Everybody knew them. They knew their wife, their husband, they knew where they live, they knew where they go shopping. And by the time the person went for training, the church was convinced this is the right person. These days we are so many, and we have no time to scrutinize anyone. So you just show up, study theology, come out of college, and go get a job. Is it possible that we have pastors among us leading the congregation without commitment? Could that be a growth problem? Is it the pressure we are facing? Is it possible there is a conference president somewhere who doesn't even believe in this church, but found themselves there? Does growth come with the demand for funding, and the lesser funding creating a crisis within the church? You have a very big congregation, but the money coming out is so little. Yes. Now questions are asked on how much should be retained in the local church, or should we even tithe? Have you come across such questions? Yeah. How much should be retained in the local church? We collect 100, we send 75. Are we okay? We remain with the 25. For every 100 we work hard to collect, somebody is not working hard somewhere, gets 75. And gives us orders on how to collect it. Now questions are being asked. These are midlife crisis. What? If we deny the midlife crisis theory, could we define the identity problem as emerging from such pressures as this point of existence? Now, a midlife crisis is a period or phase of life transition when a person begins to question the things that they have accomplished or achieved, and whether those same things still provide a sense of what? Fulfillment and meaning. If not, a person may begin to question what can bring meaning and fulfillment to the later part of their life that may be missing or unexplored. So are we in transition? That's the question we need to ask. Are we questioning hence such initiatives? We need a revival and reformation. Who said we are not revived? Did somebody suspect that we are not revived? So we decided to have a revival and what? Reformation. Because that must have come from somewhere, isn't it? Nurture and retention. Is somebody worried? And now we have a program to ensure that we must nurture and do what? Retain. I will go. Now, we have more conferences, fields, institutions, and everything being open left and right and center. Could it be a crisis? Are we responding to something? Or is it normal transition? Such a conference, such as the one we are attending, suggesting a response to certain questions. Why are we having an Adventist identity conference? Now, the major signs to look for are drastic changes in a person's outlook. Are we together? When you are talking about midlife crisis now, you look for drastic changes. Somebody changes suddenly, all of a sudden. Sometimes some people discover too late that I'm growing old and I didn't enjoy being young. So all of a sudden, the old brother starts dressing like a teenager. Are we together? He's trying to catch up with what he's losing. The major signs to look for are drastic changes in a person's outlook or behaviors. According to Jackson, they may be fixated on their past or romanticize their future. They may take more risks, such as quitting their stable job or buying pricey items. She says, adding that crisis can also result in stress-related difficulties that affect more than just the individual experiencing them. Let me ask you, friends, secularism creeping in our music and worship styles, could it be a midlife crisis? That our teenagers are no longer comfortable singing different from their Pentecostal friends. That they just stand here and sing, what a fellowship. What a fellowship. What a joy divine. And they say, yeah, that looks like the other end. Emphasis on old-time religion, fixated in the past. Give me that old-time religion, fixated in the past. Sometimes you find things like we need an image change. So much money going into expensive headquarters and church facilities, and less in evangelism. Headquarters, $200,000. Evangelism this year, $10,000. Because they say when a person is in midlife crisis, they spend a lot on pricey items they can see. They can take a picture. Are we together? Yeah. Could it be a midlife crisis? Long ago, you were comfortable with having a small cheap office with a small signboard saying Lusaka Central Conference.
Who is the pastor?
Now, listen, friends. Holding massive meetings online and on media and in public to assert our presence. It will be a midlife crisis where you want all Adventists in Nairobi to meet in one place just to show political might. For no other reason. You are not converting anyone. You just want everyone present. And you can stand and look around and say, wow. Midlife crisis, friends. Now let's talk about solutions, friends. Let's talk Now, Shelby Simon, in a very well-reviewed article, has suggested three. Has said that if you are facing a personal midlife crisis, she has suggested. What you see in parentheses is mine. She has suggested that number one, you need to get more exercise. If you find yourself in midlife crisis, now we are talking to you as an individual, you need to engage in more exercise. Are we together? Yeah. And I'm suggesting here that probably the exercise the church can engage in is soul-winning activities that reignite a reassurance that we are okay. Are we together? When we see people getting baptized, it may make us feel good again. Are we together, friends? Yeah. Then number two, she suggests that share your feelings with others. Are we together? Tell others how you are feeling. Man, I need to buy a Subaru that makes noise. When I drive, everybody knows the pastor has arrived. And the others will know you are old, man. You are old. You can't do that. And I'm suggesting that we need more conferences such as this one where we talk to ourselves about the strange things we are doing. Are we together? Strange things we are doing. Where we can tell ourselves, brethren, when we look at our spending this year, we spend more building than preaching. And what we are building is not even a place of worship. It's just an office. For 12 people to stay there, air conditioned, with flat screens, TVs, and carpets. And then say, why don't we shift that budget? At least 50%, we send it out there to start more church. We talk to each other. Share your feelings with others. I think that's why we are here, to share what? Feelings. We'll share feelings. And then change your thinking. Change your thinking. Now, change your thinking. Shelby says that sometimes you may start feeling inadequate and depressed. No, don't have fear and don't have negativity. You are okay. Are we together, friends? You are okay. Midlife crisis is normal. Are we together? Yeah, it's normal. Don't have negative feelings. When you see these things happening, lift up your heads. Are we together? Yes. Let's draw a conclusion and get out of here. Now, Ellen White had just written of her amazement of what God had wrought in the advancement of the cause, and that we have nothing to do with. Yeah. So when you see identity issues, you have nothing to fear. Why? Because Christ is the head of the church, not you. Not you. So you have nothing to fear. He can't lose control.
Amen. Amen.
You see, friends, Christ was the head of the church when it was in its infancy.
Sure.
And he was the head of the church when it had adolescent behavior. Are we evangelicals? But Christ was still the head of the church. Are we together? He was still the head of the church. And Christ is still the head of the church even through midlife crisis. And can I tell you good news? If death occurs, perchance, I'm here to tell you that he is the resurrection and the life.
Wow.